I went to a store that wasn't real. Years ago, I went to Denmark with my mother and her partner for a friend's wedding. A few days before the ceremony, we decided to shop for a dress on Stroget in Copenhagen. I was hopeful about finding something beautiful, but after hours of searching, every shop was a disappointment. Each store was filled with the same dull colors that seemed to be in fashion that summer. It started pouring rain, and just as we were about to give up, I spotted a familiar clothing store. It was a popular chain I'd always liked, and something told me we might have better luck there. My mom and I ducked inside while her partner stayed outside, taking shelter under a small awning as he lit a cigarette. What we saw inside was unforgettable. The store was bustling with people, unlike any other shop we'd visited that day. And the clothes, they were stunning. Dresses in every shade of purple, skirts with patterns of gold and deep violet. It was like stepping into a dream. I turned to my mom, saying, "This is it. I want everything in here." My mom, who normally wasn't interested in the younger styles of this chain, found herself captivated too. We both looked like we'd been dragged through a rainstorm, so we decided to come back the next day. We didn't want to rush through this magical store, and we certainly didn't want to make her partner wait outside for long. Plus, there was an entire second floor we hadn't explored yet, and we wanted time to look at everything. Giddy with excitement, I could hardly wait to return. The next day, we went back straight to the same spot. I recognized the store's sign and the drugstore across the street, so I knew we were in the right place. But something felt off. Ignoring that uneasy feeling, we went inside, only to be met with disappointment. The store looked completely different. It was empty, with only a few racks of bland clothes in the same boring colors we'd seen everywhere else. There was no second floor, no crowd, and none of those dreamy dresses. My mom was as bewildered as I was. She rushed over to an employee and asked, "Did you change everything overnight?" The woman looked at her blankly and replied, "No, we only get new items once a week." It was as if the magical shop from the day before had vanished into thin air. Outside, we noticed something else strange. The small vestibule where my mom's partner had sheltered from the rain was gone. There was no awning, no cover, nothing. It was as if our memory of that day had been altered, or like we'd somehow stepped into a different version of reality. My mom and I talked about it for years afterward. She was genuinely sad, often saying, "I wish we just bought something when we were there." It was the one time we truly bonded over clothes, and it felt like that store had been some kind of dream we shared. And what would have happened if we'd bought something? Would those clothes have vanished too? I once heard a similar story about a guy in Iran. He swore he'd found a fancy diner on the second floor above a gas station in a remote mountain village. He claimed it was the best meal he'd ever had, yet when he returned with friends to prove it existed, there was no second floor at all. To this day, I can still picture every detail of that store. The colors, the designs, and the packed crowd. None of the other stores on Stroget had been even remotely busy that day, yet that one was bustling. It's one of the strangest experiences I've ever had, and every time I think of it, I wonder, did I walk into some kind of alternate reality just for a moment? Even my mom's partner, who doesn't believe in anything supernatural, couldn't explain it. This is, without a doubt, the most surreal experience I've ever had. My husband loves hearing these strange stories, and he agrees this one tops them all, especially since my mom experienced it too. My classmate malfunctioned. This happened back when I was a freshman in high school. I'm a junior now. But it randomly came to mind today. It's one of the strangest things I've ever experienced, and I still haven't found a good explanation for it. It was halfway through second period, and our teacher had to leave for the rest of class. She said she had a meeting or something. She left a substitute in charge, and as soon as she was gone, my classmates started doing what you'd expect. Chatting with each other, scrolling on their phones, and getting a bit rowdy. I put on my headphones, trying to tune them out, especially this loud group at the table next to mine. They were laughing, tossing school supplies around, and just being obnoxious. Then, out of nowhere, something really weird happened. One of the kids at that table started to speak, but his words glitched mid-sentence. He stuttered in a way that didn't sound normal, more like an audio loop, like how an Alexa sounds when it's glitching. For a split second, his voice repeated a word at a rapid pace, almost like a skipping record. I couldn't tell what he was trying to say, but it was so strange that I immediately took my headphones off. The room went silent, and I mean dead silent. I looked up and realized that everyone had this eerily calm look, like they'd been quiet the whole time. The kids who were just laughing and goofing off looked bored and still, like someone had flipped a switch. The strangest part was the kid who had glitched. He was just sitting there, hand over his mouth, like he was embarrassed by what had happened. None of his friends reacted at all. They just sat there, totally blank-faced, like statues. For about 5 seconds, it felt like everything was frozen, with this unsettling calm settling over the room. Then, just as suddenly, everyone snapped back to normal. Conversations resumed, people started scrolling their phones again, and the loud table went back to joking and throwing things around. It was like that strange, quiet moment had never even happened. I just sat there, looking around, completely bewildered. The rest of the day was ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was like the simulation glitched, like someone realized one of the robots had malfunctioned and hit pause to fix it, only they forgot to pause me. I know it sounds bizarre, and maybe it's just my imagination, but it genuinely felt like I'd witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. To this day, I have no idea what happened in that classroom. It's still the creepiest thing I've ever experienced, and every time I think about it, I feel that same weird chill run down my spine. My boyfriend and I somehow lost an entire day. Back in 2014, I was living with my boyfriend and working in debt collections for a well-known company. I hated the job. It felt tedious and unfulfilling. Because we handled sensitive information like social security numbers and addresses, employees couldn't even bring phones into the building. Once a month, they put us on mandatory overtime to handle accounts headed to the next phase of collections. My schedule was 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Monday, and 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. on both Tuesday and Wednesday. After a long shift on Monday, I came home, watched Netflix with my boyfriend, and eventually fell asleep. The next time I woke up was to go to the bathroom. I checked my phone and saw it was 8:13. Thinking I'd forgotten to set an alarm, I scrambled to get ready and managed to pull into the work parking lot by 8:56, just in time. But as I clocked in, my coworker Anna stopped me and asked, "Where were you yesterday?" Confused, I replied, here." Anna insisted I hadn't been at work, which I found strange but brushed off. We were pretty close as coworkers, always venting about work and texting or chatting on social media. Figuring she was just messing with me, I sat down at my desk. Then, about 20 minutes into my shift, I glanced at the calendar on my computer. It was showing Wednesday. Now I really thought Anna was playing a weird prank, like she'd somehow changed my computer settings. But when I took my lunch break and went to my car, I checked my phone. It also said Wednesday. That's when I started panicking. I called my boyfriend, who hadn't left for his second shift job yet, and he confirmed his phone also said it was Wednesday. He was just as freaked out as I was. The strangest part? No one else seemed to notice. I wasn't starving or thirsty, like I would be if I hadn't eaten or drunk anything for an entire day. Both of us were heavy smokers, but we didn't wake up craving a cigarette as we normally would. We lived with my boyfriend's 2 brothers and had 2 dogs, one elderly and one a puppy, both needing regular bathroom breaks. But neither dog had an accident, nor did they act like they hadn't been fed in over 24 hours. When we asked his brothers, they said they hadn't fed or taken out the dogs on Tuesday either. I always called my mom during my commute, but she hadn't mentioned not hearing from me the day before. Even stranger, neither of us faced any work consequences for a missed shift. We hadn't received any missed calls or texts on Tuesday, and there were no write-ups or follow-ups from management. It was as if Tuesday hadn't existed for us. To this day, I can't explain what happened. If I'd been alone, I might have guessed it was sheer exhaustion or an odd 24-hour illness that made me sleep through a day. But since we both experienced it with no consequences, it feels like we went to sleep on Monday, skipped Tuesday in some bizarre way, and picked up life as usual on Wednesday. I still think about it regularly, and no one I've told has come up with a plausible explanation. It's as though we just ceased to exist in this reality for a day. Baby disappeared. Baby under the bed. This happened around 13 years ago, but I still think about it constantly. At the time, I had 2 sons, my older one, almost a year old, and my newborn, who was just weeks old. I had laid my newborn on my bed while I folded some laundry, keeping a close eye on him. At one point, I turned to check on my older son, just for a minute. But when I looked back, my newborn was gone. The bed was just empty. His little blanket lay crumpled where he had been, along with the pacifier he'd been using, and the tiny pajamas he had been wearing, but no baby. I frantically searched the room, thinking maybe he'd somehow rolled off. I checked under every piece of clothing, every fold in the blanket. Then I looked under the bed. Nothing. He was nowhere. Panic set in. I ran outside, thinking maybe his dad had taken him out without me noticing, but he hadn't. Now we were both panicked, tearing the house apart looking for our baby. Every second felt like an eternity. After what seemed like ages, maybe 10 minutes, I heard a soft cooing sound. It was coming from under the bed. I shouted for his dad, who came running. Without a second thought, he lifted the entire bed. And there he was, our newborn, lying directly beneath it, smack in the center of the floor, dressed only in his diaper. No pajamas, no blanket. It was as if he had somehow passed right through the mattress, leaving everything behind on top of the bed. He hadn't made a sound, not a single cry, until the bed was lifted, and the light startled him. It was as though he had simply slipped away, beyond reason or explanation. The day my toddler fell toward the oven. I don't think I've shared this story before. My daughter is now 21, but this happened when she was around 2.5. I was in the kitchen, which opened up to the living room, checking on something baking in the oven. My husband was half asleep on the couch, watching TV, while our daughter was toddling around nearby. I'd opened the oven door to check on the food and quickly turned to grab a pot holder. When I looked back, I saw my daughter almost right in front of me, starting to fall forward, hands outstretched, toward the open oven door. I shouted, "Oh God, help!" And in that single instant, it felt like my whole life shifted. My mind flashed through a series of vivid, painful images. I could see her landing on the oven, getting horrific burns, us rushing to the emergency room. I saw her spending months in the hospital, scarred, surgeries piling up, her movement restricted by scars as she grew older. I felt the weight of what could be a lifetime spent in hospitals, a future filled with painful procedures. I lived that whole agonizing timeline in a matter of seconds. Then, suddenly, I snapped back to reality. My husband was looking at me, irritated, asking, "What?" Our daughter was now 3 feet back from the oven, on her hands and knees, far from where she was just a moment earlier. I stammered, "She fell. She almost landed on the oven door." My husband looked over, shrugged, and said, "She's nowhere near it," then took a sip of his beer. I'll never forget that moment. Despite everything else I've experienced as a parent, this incident stayed with me like nothing else. Years later, when I told my daughter about it, she was visibly shaken. She said it haunted her too, feeling like that alternate timeline had somehow existed, but didn't. To this day, I'm grateful for whatever glitch spared us from what felt like a certain tragedy. I don't question it, but I still think about it every now and then, my heart leaping at the memory. I know it happened, even if there's no explanation. An unhinged evening. This is hands down the most unhinged experience I've ever had, and I still don't fully understand what happened. I'll try to start at the beginning. I'm a 41-year-old mom, and my 23-year-old daughter and I don't live together, but we try to meet up every couple of weeks. Tonight we were shoe shopping, and afterward, we were starving. Ruby Tuesday was right next door, so even though it wasn't our first choice, we decided to grab a quick bite. We were seated by a server with a pink handkerchief in her hair, who took our drink and food orders. The restaurant was almost empty, so we figured it wouldn't take long. While we waited, I noticed a table nearby with 3 women, maybe a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter. What was weird was that their plates were empty, yet they kept taking bites. They didn't talk, just kept miming eating. The younger ones sat with perfect posture, smiling and nodding. At one point, the middle-aged woman said, "We should just get this wrapped up to go." But there was nothing on their plates. I gave my daughter a look like, "Are you seeing this?" Meanwhile, Beck was playing over the speakers, which felt like a strange choice for Ruby Tuesday. Then, Crash Into Me by Dave Matthews Band came on. My daughter commented on my knowing all the lyrics, and I laughed, saying, "I'm a 90s kid." An hour passed, and we still didn't have our food. I considered asking about it, not wanting to be that person. But finally, I flagged down the server and politely asked if we could just pay for our drinks and cancel the order, since I had to get up early for work. She said okay and walked away, but seconds later, I swear, she walked by us again, in the same direction, and told us, "Your food should be out soon." I gave my daughter a look and she whispered, "I'm starting to feel really anxious. Can we just leave?" I nodded, relieved she felt it too. Then, Crash Into Me started playing again, and the whole atmosphere just felt off. Our server returned, urging us to stay, because the kitchen was backed up. But I insisted we needed to go. I paid, tipped, and we left. The minute we stepped outside, the whole vibe shifted. On the drive home, we kept asking each other, "Did you see that? What on earth just happened?" It was as if the whole evening had taken on this surreal, almost sinister energy. By then, I wasn't even hungry anymore. I felt unsettled, like I just walked out of some kind of strange parallel universe. My daughter felt it too. We can't explain it, but everything about that night just felt really, really wrong. Back from the dead? There's a strange story in my friend group. Years ago, a guy close to us, a regular at family gatherings, vacations and all, died from a drug overdose. His death was heartbreaking, and though I couldn't attend the memorial because I was living out of state, I remember the grief very clearly. Fast forward to about 5 years ago, my boyfriend and I had moved back to our hometown, and one night his coworker, who also grew up in our area, was hanging out at our place. A local news article started circulating about a man convicted for causing a fatal accident while driving under the influence. Tragically, a toddler had passed away in the incident. This man was sentenced to life in prison. Then, the shock hit us. The man in the article was the same guy we all believed had died years before. My boyfriend's coworker and I looked at each other and said, "Wait, didn't he die a few years ago?" It was surreal. We couldn't understand how this was possible. To see if we were somehow mistaken, I called a close childhood friend. She also remembered his death vividly. It had been a huge loss to everyone who knew him. In fact, her mom used to date this guy's father, so she was as connected to his family as anyone. Many of my friends remember his death, some don't. I can't imagine asking his family about it. They've been through so much, and it's been years since I last saw them. But somehow, here we are, with memories of a death that shouldn't have left room for him to be alive, much less convicted. He's where he belongs now, but the mystery remains. We'll probably never understand how something so strange and happened. I saw myself. Back in the early 90s, I was a bartender at a hotel lounge. Sometimes patrons would call me Candy, but when I corrected them, saying that wasn't my name, they'd tell me I had a twin. Apparently, this Candy was a nurse at the local hospital. I found it strange. I knew people sometimes looked alike, but I was sure I didn't resemble this woman. I have a pretty distinct appearance, and the idea of a twin nearby was unsettling. One evening, I was tending bar as usual when a guy called my name. I turned to take his order, and there she was, sitting at the bar, staring back at me. It was like looking into a mirror. She was identical to me in every way, down to my hairstyle, eye color, and even my nose, which has a unique shape. Everything matched, except for one detail. She was wearing scrubs. I felt like I was in a trance, almost out of my body. I had heard those old stories about seeing your doppelganger, the myth that meeting your exact double could lead to some kind of paradox, even danger. I felt that chill run through me. The woman looked just as shocked. She didn't say a word, just studied me with the same wide-eyed look of disbelief. The man ordered their drinks, and as I turned to prepare them, I kept glancing over my shoulder. But when I turned back, they were gone. She had disappeared without a sound, like a ghost. I was rattled. Was that the woman people had been mistaking me for? This Candy? She looked exactly like me, but more than that, it was as if we shared something beyond just looks. A connection I couldn't explain. Here's the strangest part. Not long after that, I moved to a different town, and I ended up becoming a nurse myself. Sometimes I wonder if that wasn't just a doppelganger that night in the bar. Maybe, in some impossible way, I'd caught a glimpse of my future self.